Classic Plus is a concept that's been floating around since Classic WoW launched back in 2019, and seems to be kind of a divisive topic. Some players want it, but may have different opinions about what it should be, and others want it to not happen under any circumstance. Personally, I've wanted Classic Plus since around the re-release of Blackwing Lair, or at least the version of it that occupies a portion of my mind. Recently, I've seen some discussion around what it should or shouldn't be, or if it should even exist at all, but very little on how we even get to it to begin with. Blizzard isn't going to throw a bunch of money into an unknown quantity. We would have to prove that it would work. But at the same time, we can't prove it would work unless it already exists. It's a little bit of a catch-22. Sure, we can all rally online and keep pushing the idea to them, and we definitely should, but as we all know, many times on the internet, the loudest people are actually a small minority. Before I get into it, I want to address what I believe to be the worst arguments against Classic Plus, that I'm sure will pop up in the comments anyways. The first of which is, go play retail. This is a really bad argument. The way I see it, there are really only two ways to come to this line of thought. You either need to believe that anything that is not a 100% recreation of Classic is immediately exactly the same as retail, which is obviously impossible. Or you have to believe that the differences between Classic and retail are so thin that even the slightest change would turn one into the other, which is almost as absurd. Classic and retail are two very different games that appeal to two completely different player bases, and there are players that want something that's closer to Classic, but also slightly different. This argument isn't only bad, it's invalid. And the second argument is that it would divide the player base. Currently, we have Classic Wrath, and we have retail. It does seem like the player base is already divided, but like I just said, these three games have three entirely different player bases. The people who like Classic are already playing it. The people who like retail are already playing it. Sure, there's probably some overlap, but I'd guess that they're probably mostly different players that want entirely different things. Personally, as someone who wants Classic Plus, I don't really play Classic anymore, so it's not like you'd be taking me away from it. There are over 12 million people who've played this game in one form or another, and Classic Plus could be a way to bring some of them back. At the end of the day, just play the version of the game that you enjoy the most. And don't tell others that they shouldn't get something else just because it doesn't line up exactly with what you want. Anyways, back to the subject at hand. How do we convince Blizzard to invest these resources when they're not sure it would even perform well? We would have to get them to test the waters one way or another, so I think we should try to convince them to release an updated version of Classic that would not take a whole lot of resources to make, but at the same time would show the players that they're willing to expand on the idea if it's popular enough. So I'm going to propose what I believe would be the cheapest way they could do this. Let's start with the leveling. It's far too slow. WoW players disagree on a lot of things, but one of the few I think most of us can agree on is that the real game is endgame. WoW launched nearly 20 years ago. Classic launched almost 4 years ago. Reaching max level is no longer a prestigious accomplishment. It's a tedious chore. WoW's strength is in its endgame. So locking it behind an arbitrary time sink is only going to drive players away. Leveling in WoW should really only serve two purposes: telling a story and teaching players how to play. A lot of low-level zones could use some love, and they should definitely get it eventually, but that would potentially take more initial resources than Blizzard would be willing to invest. So I think just speeding up the grind to 60 would do wonders for player retention in the short run. Next is class balances. Just do it. I have not seen a single good argument against this. There's literally no reason not to do it. What does the game gain by having useless talent trees? What benefit is there to having 70% of your player base play one class? Let hybrids pull acceptable DPS. Let paladins and shaman tank. And please, for the love of God, unscuff the unholy abomination that is feral druids. You don't need to make the classes as complex as retail. You don't even need to overhaul them. Just adjust the numbers and maybe add a couple of abilities to make them not useless. Also, adjust the stats on gear to make individual pieces more useful. Not everyone wants to play a Fury Warrior or a Dwarf Holy Priest. Letting players play the classes they want to competitively would only help bring old players back and new players in. Next is dungeons. Simple solution here, just make heroic versions of all the classic 5-mans for level 60 players. As one of the 5 people across the multiverse that has both Wailing Caverns and Sunken Temple memorized, and also enjoys both of them, I would love to see these brought up to max level. Sure, you could say it's reusing old content, and that you've already done these before, but so what? Classic WoW is all about replaying old content, and people still happily do it. If you're the kind of person that only does each piece of content once, and then refuses to ever touch it again, then I hate to break it to you, but maybe no version of WoW is for you. Alright, raids then. I think the best option to drop in immediately would be scalable raid sizes like in retail. 40 people is a lot to manage for both pugs and guilds. With scalable raid sizes, you wouldn't have to worry about filling those last couple slots. If someone's being rude or not pulling their weight, you could just kick them and not worry about replacing them. A few of your raiders are running late? No problem, just start without them. It really would help out the classic raiding scene a lot. Personally, I would love to see some boss mechanics reworked a little, just to get rid of what we'll call less fun strategies. This is more of a wish list thing for me though, not really a necessity. Also, while we're on the subject of raiding, let's just get rid of world buffs, debuff limits, and spell batching. They're not fun or engaging. They only detract from the overall experience in my opinion. World buffs are just flat out unnecessary. The content isn't hard enough to warrant them, and the only reason players use them is because our smooth brains demand we place efficiency over fun. Debuff limits just unfairly short stick certain classes and specs, making them less fun to play, and I've never heard anyone say anything good about spell batching. On to PvP. Just add arenas and raided battlegrounds. Arenas have been around since Burning Crusade, and raided battlegrounds have been around since Cataclysm, so it shouldn't be too hard to implement them here. And finally, add dual spec. This alone would have made Classic a whole lot more enjoyable to many players. So this might seem like a lot, but honestly, all I've suggested so far is faster leveling, minor class and item tweaks, level 60 versions of dungeons that already exist, the flexible raid size feature that already exists in retail, removing a couple of the artificial limits that Blizzard had to recreate in order to make Classic more authentic, adding PvP modes that already exist and have existed for over a decade, and finally, adding yet another feature that has existed for most of WoW's lifespan. Honestly, I don't think this would be too unfeasible to achieve by a small team at Blizzard. It would serve as a much more usable foundation to build new Classic content on top of, and it could serve as a relatively cheap test to gauge interest in the concept of Classic Plus. It would show that they're willing to give it a try before they invest a ton of resources into an unknown quantity, and I have no doubt that the initial hype would bring in enough players to at least pay for the chance at it succeeding. Once Classic Plus gets established and Blizzard sees the potential, it could get a dedicated team to expand upon it, and we could get some of the new content that players are asking for. There does exist one more problem with Classic Plus that needs to be addressed before it begins though, and that's the P word. Power creep. We all know what it means. It's one of the main reasons Blizzard keeps increasing the level cap with every expansion. Players get too powerful for their level after a while, but if we're expecting to stay at level 60 in perpetuity, it's going to become a problem almost immediately. And realistically, I think there's only one solution to it, which is horizontal progression. Now, horizontal progression is a somewhat known thing. Guild Wars 2 has been doing it for over a decade, and they seem to be doing fine, but I don't know how well it would work in WoW. The idea would be that the rewards from new content would be equal to the rewards from previous content. So for example, Molten Core gear would be the same item level as Blackwing Lair gear. For the entirety of WoW's history, the progression path has always been the masochist's treadmill, and changing that could make long-term players feel alienated. Personally, I would welcome it. Maybe I've ran that treadmill for too long. Maybe I've just been scorned by RNG one too many times. And maybe this is a solution that would prevent me from burning out like I do every time I come back to this game. So I think it's worth a try. Horizontal progression does have its pros and cons. On one hand, once you get full best in slot, you have it forever, which feels good. On the other hand, if you have full best in slot, you have no reason to keep doing the raids, which feels not so good. Sure, there might be pieces in the future that are minor upgrades for your specific spec, but for the most part, you would be at max power. So there would have to be at least one more motivating factor to keep bringing players back. Cosmetics are a good option, but I think we've seen the real solution pop up in Classic already. Speedrunning. Personally, it's not my thing, but a lot of players seem to be embracing it in Classic. Maybe make official leaderboards for world, region, and even servers, or make weekly challenges to do the raid in a specific way. Another part of horizontal progression is that all the raids stay relevant, which is great. But then, once more content drops, which ones do you run and which ones do you skip? Nobody wants to run 15 raids every week, so we would need a system to encourage us to choose maybe just one or a couple. Maybe you could put the raids on a monthly rotation where one of them has an increased difficulty, and completing it with limited deaths could drop an exclusive mount or grant a title. Maybe a different one could have a reduced difficulty to allow less developed guilds a chance at progressing. These are just ideas. They wouldn't have to do that exactly. I'm just saying that there are options, and it's worth discussing. Anyways, that's all just my personal opinion on the subject. One thing to keep in mind is that we'll never know what could be unless we try. If you want Classic Plus, tell Blizzard. Keep spreading it until they're forced to acknowledge it. Keep the discussion going and never give up. Then, maybe one day, we can make it a reality. Thanks for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed the video, and have a nice day.